Hello, and welcome to the channel. The story you're about to hear is about a man who reached into the heavens and brought down fire. It's about how a candle maker's son, with barely 2 years of formal education, became the most famous American in the world. A man who shaped lightning, nations, and the very idea of what a human life could be. June 1752, Philadelphia. A storm is building over the city. Benjamin Franklin stands in an open field, 46 years old, watching the sky darken. Beside him is his son, William, 21, illegitimate, acknowledged, but never quite explained. The air has that particular thickness that comes before summer rain, humid, electric, alive with anticipation. You can smell it, the dust of the field about to be transformed into mud, the metallic tang that precedes thunder, something sharp and dangerous riding on the wind. Franklin has brought a kite, not a child's toy, but something he's constructed with care. A large silk handkerchief stretched across two crossed cedar strips with a pointed wire extending from the top. To the kite, he's attached a hemp string, and where the hemp meets a silk ribbon, silk being an insulator, he's tied a metal key. The key hangs there, ordinary, the kind you might use to open a door, now about to unlock something far stranger. The first drops of rain begin to fall. They're warm, almost gentle, pattering against the dry earth with that particular sound of relief, of tension breaking. Franklin launches the kite. It rises awkwardly at first, then catches the wind, climbing higher, the silk darkening as the rain intensifies. William watches his father's face. Franklin is utterly focused, his eyes tracking the kite's ascent into the churning clouds. Rain streams down both their faces now. The storm is directly overhead, and the rational thing, the safe thing, would be to seek shelter. Instead, Franklin moves closer to the key, extending his knuckle toward it. Nothing happens. The hemp string is still, dry near the bottom, protected by the silk ribbon. They wait. Rain soaks through their clothes. Thunder rolls across the sky, closer now, the kind that you feel in your chest. Franklin's hypothesis is elegant. If lightning is electrical in nature, as he believes, then the storm clouds themselves must be charged, and a kite flown into them should conduct that charge down to earth. Should. In natural philosophy, there is always a distance between theory and proof, between what you believe and what you can demonstrate. Then, and this is the moment that will be told and retold, painted and engraved, mythologized until the truth becomes inseparable from the legend. Franklin notices the loose fibers of the hemp string beginning to stand erect. He brings his knuckle near the key again. A spark leaps the gap. It's small, this spark. Not the dramatic bolt of popular imagination, not the theatrical fire of legend, but a genuine spark nonetheless. Visible, unmistakable, carrying with it the confirmation of everything Franklin has theorized. He can feel it, that tiny shock. The heavens, it seems, are not so different from the Leyden jars in his laboratory, from the electrical experiments he's been conducting for 6 years. The sky itself is a vast electrical machine, and he has just proven it. William sees his father's face transform, not with triumph exactly, but with something deeper. The satisfaction of understanding, of having asked nature a question and received an answer. Franklin touches the key again, draws another spark. He fills a Leyden jar from the electrical charge, storing lightning itself in glass and metal. The rain continues. The storm doesn't care about human revelation. It simply is, as it has always been. But now it means something different. Now it can be understood. They will go home soon, soak through, carrying their equipment through the muddy streets of Philadelphia. Franklin will write up his experiment with characteristic precision, will communicate his findings to colleagues in Europe, will add this to the growing body of knowledge about electricity. The pointed lightning rod he's already invented will save countless buildings from fire. His fame, already considerable among natural philosophers, will become universal. The man who tamed lightning, the American Prometheus. But standing in that field, rain streaming down, holding a key that sparks when touched, Franklin is thinking about something else. He's thinking about the distance he's traveled, from his father's candle shop in Boston, from the poverty and obscurity that seemed his birthright, from the limitations that society tried to place on him. He's thinking about all the barriers he's crossed, all the impossible things he's done simply by refusing to accept that they were impossible. Because this is what Franklin does. This is what he's always done. He reaches for things that aren't supposed to be within reach. He asks questions he isn't supposed to ask. He proves that the distance between earth and heaven, between common birth and greatness, between what is and what could be, is not as vast as everyone assumes. It's just a matter of the right materials, the right method, the right stubborn refusal to accept the world as given. The storm will pass. The sky will clear. Father and son will walk home together through streets that don't yet know what's just been proven. And Franklin will go on to prove so much more about nature, about politics, about human potential, about the structure of society and the possibility of change. He will help birth a nation. He will charm the French court while dressed as a frontier philosopher. He will negotiate treaties and write constitutions and invent bifocals and map the Gulf Stream. He will become Poor Richard and the first American and the symbol of self-made success. His face eventually gracing currency, his name attached to schools and streets and cities. But it all starts here in a sense. Or, rather, this moment contains all of it. The curiosity, the courage, the absolute conviction that mysteries can be solved, that the powerful forces that govern the world can be understood and harnessed and put to use in the service of human betterment. How does a candlemaker's son become Benjamin Franklin? How does anyone bridge the gap between where they begin and where they're determined to go? The answer is in the key, in the kite, in the willingness to stand in a storm and reach for lightning. The answer is in refusing to accept that anything is beyond reach, that any question is forbidden, that the circumstances of your birth determine the possibilities of your life. But to understand how Franklin became the man who could stand in that field and coax fire from the sky, we must go back to the beginning. We must go to Boston, to a crowded house on Milk Street, to the smell of rendered tallow and the sound of Puritan sermons, to a boy who read by candlelight and dreamed of a larger world. We must go back to where it all began. Benjamin Franklin is born on January 17th, 1706, in Boston, Massachusetts, Bay Colony, on Milk Street, in a house already crowded with children. He is the 10th son, the 15th child of 17 that Josiah Franklin will father across 2 marriages. The arithmetic of this is worth considering. 17 children in a house that is not large, in a city that is not wealthy, in a time when survival itself is never guaranteed. The house smells of tallow. This is the first fact of Franklin's childhood, the scent that will permeate his earliest memories. Rendered animal fat, beef and mutton, boiled down in great kettles to make the candles and soap that Josiah sells. It's not a pleasant smell. Thick, greasy, coating the back of your throat, clinging to clothes and hair and skin. It's the smell of labor, of modest commerce, of a family making its way through the transformation of slaughterhouse waste into light. Josiah Franklin is 49 when Benjamin is born, a man who has already lived one life in England as a silk dyer before bringing his family to the New World in 1683. His first wife, Anne, bore him 7 children. After her death, he married Abiah Folger, who will bear him 10 more. Benjamin is Abiah's 8th child, her youngest son. The world Benjamin is born into is small, constrained, regulated by Puritan discipline and colonial limitation. Boston in 1706 has perhaps 7,000 souls, making it the largest city in British North America. Yet it would fit comfortably into a corner of London. Church dominates everything. The Congregational Meeting House is the center of civic and spiritual life, and attendance is not optional. Sundays mean 2 sermons, each lasting 2 hours or more. The congregation sitting on hard benches in an unheated building, listening to detailed examinations of sin and salvation, of God's inscrutable will and humanity's utter depravity. And there is death, constant death. Of Josiah and Abiah's 10 children together, 4 will die in childhood. 2 of Josiah's children from his first marriage die young as well. Smallpox, diphtheria, scarlet fever, consumption. The diseases have names, but the symptoms are similar. The fever, the labored breathing, the small body growing smaller, the tiny coffin. 6 of Benjamin's siblings never reach adulthood. This is normal. This is expected. When Benjamin is 8 years old, Josiah makes a decision. One son will be dedicated to the church, tithed to God as a kind of offering. Of all the children, Benjamin shows the most promise. Quick-minded, verbally precocious, good at memorization. Josiah enrolls him in the Boston Latin School, the grammar school that prepares boys for Harvard. For 2 years, Benjamin studies Latin and Greek, rhetoric and theology. He excels. The classical languages come easily to him. The rhetorical structures feel natural. He's learning to argue, to pass meaning, to construct persuasive sentences. But Harvard costs money. The full education would bankrupt Josiah's modest business. Somewhere in 1716, when Benjamin is 10, Josiah performs his own calculation and reaches a painful conclusion. He cannot afford to dedicate a son to God. Benjamin is withdrawn from the Latin school. He spends 1 year at George Brownell School, learning writing and arithmetic, practical skills for a tradesman's son. Then, at age 10, his formal education ends. He goes to work full-time in his father's shop, cutting wicks, filling molds, stirring the great kettles of boiling fat, the steam rising in his face, the smell now inescapable, because it's not just his environment, but his labor, his future. He hates it, not the work itself. Franklin is never lazy, never afraid of labor, but what it represents, the limitation, the assumption that because he was born in this house, to this father, his life is therefore determined. He will make candles as his father makes candles. He will die in the same obscurity in which he was born. But Benjamin reads, this is the crucial fact, the seed of everything that will follow. Josiah has a small library, mostly religious works, sermons, but Benjamin devours them. He reads John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress. He reads Plutarch's Lives in translation and discovers that the world contains greatness, individuals who shaped history through force of will and clarity of thought. He reads Daniel Defoe's An Essay Upon Projects, full of schemes for social improvement, the rational organization of society. The books create a hunger. More accurately, they reveal a hunger that was already there, give it shape and direction. Benjamin begins to understand that there are other ways to live, other possibilities, other cities beyond Boston. The knowledge is intoxicating and agonizing in equal measure. To know that something else exists and to be trapped in circumstances that seem to forbid it, this is a particular kind of torture. Josiah sees his son's restlessness and worries. A boy who reads too much, who thinks too much. This is dangerous. Benjamin is 12 now, old enough to be formally apprenticed. Josiah takes him around to various craftsmen. They visit a cutler, a bricklayer, a turner. Benjamin watches each craft with polite attention and suppressed contempt. The problem is that Benjamin has also discovered he loves the water. Boston is a port city, and the harbor is a place of possibility. Ships arriving from London, from the Caribbean, from the wider world. Benjamin swims in the Charles River, becomes an excellent swimmer, dreams of going to sea. Josiah recognizes this danger. The sea is a graveyard. One of Benjamin's older brothers, Josiah Jr., has already gone to sea and died there. The sea takes boys from Boston families and rarely returns them. Josiah will not lose another son to the water. And so, in 1718, when Benjamin is 12 years old, Josiah makes another decision. His son James, 21 years old, has recently returned from England trained as a printer. James is setting up a print shop in Boston. Josiah proposes, or rather decrees, that Benjamin will be apprenticed to his brother. The indenture will last until Benjamin turns 21, 9 years of bound service. In exchange, James will teach him the printing trade, provide food and lodging, and pay him nothing beyond room and board until the final year. Benjamin signs the papers, or rather, Josiah signs them on his behalf. A boy of 12 has no legal standing. The terms are simple and brutal. Benjamin belongs to James now, legally, completely, for 9 years. He cannot leave without permission. He cannot work for anyone else. His labor, his time, his future, all of it belongs to his brother. But Benjamin is not entirely disappointed, because printing means proximity to words, to ideas, to the world of books and arguments. Printing means ink instead of tallow, paper instead of rendered fat. It means the possibility however constrained, of something different. He walks to his brother's shop on Queen Street, leaving behind the house on Milk Street, the kettles of boiling tallow, the childhood that has already lasted too long. He is 12 years old. He is legally bound to servitude, and he is absolutely convinced, with the groundless certainty that sometimes precedes truth, that he will not die in the same obscurity in which he was born. The question is how to escape. The answer, when it comes, will require patience, deception, and a willingness to break the law. But that is still years away. For now, there is work to learn, type to set, ink to mix, and the intoxicating smell of a print shop, not flowers, not pleasant exactly, but infinitely preferable to tallow. The smell of possibility. The print shop on Queen Street becomes Benjamin Franklin's entire world. It's a single room dominated by the printing press, a wooden frame and screw mechanism that can exert tremendous pressure, transforming inked type into printed page. The smell is ink and paper, metal and oil, fundamentally different from tallow. This is the smell of ideas made tangible, of thoughts given permanence. James Franklin is not a kind master. He's 21 when Benjamin arrives, conscious of his own recent elevation to master craftsman, determined to maintain authority over his younger brother. The apprentice system is built on hierarchy and discipline. James has the legal right to beat Benjamin for infractions, and he exercises this right. The work is demanding, setting type letter by letter, inking the press, operating the mechanism, cleaning equipment, running errands. But there are compensations. The print shop attracts a certain kind of person, men who read, who argue, who care about ideas. Benjamin listens, absorbs, begins to understand that the world contains debates, controversies, competing visions of truth. He has access to books now, borrowed from customers, read late at night. He discovers the Spectator essays of Addison and Steele, witty, urbane, demonstrating that prose can be both elegant and persuasive. He copies them out by hand, then tries to recreate them from memory, teaching himself to write by imitation. In August 1721, James makes a bold decision. He will launch a newspaper, the New England Courant, only the second newspaper in Boston and the first to operate independently without government approval. It's a dangerous venture. Boston's establishment, the ministers, the magistrates, do not appreciate criticism. But James has a rebellious streak, and the Courant will give it voice. The newspaper is an immediate sensation. James and his contributors write with irreverence, mocking the Puritan establishment, questioning authority, making jokes at the expense of powerful men. Cotton Mather, Boston's most prominent minister, becomes a frequent target. Benjamin, 16 years old, watches with yearning. He wants to write for the Courant. He tries submitting pieces under his own name, but James dismisses them without consideration. A 16-year-old apprentice, the master's younger brother, his opinions are not wanted. So Benjamin creates Silence Dogood. The first letter appears in April 1722, slipped anonymously under the print shop door at night. It purports to be from a widow, a middle-aged woman of modest means and considerable wit. The voice is perfect. Neither male nor female could be certain of the author's true gender, and the opinions are sharp enough to draw blood. while remaining just barely within propriety. Silence. Dogood writes about hypocrisy in religion, about the pretensions of Harvard students, about the treatment of women, about fashion and drunkenness, and the corruption of power. The letters are funny, insightful, dangerous. Boston readers devour them. James is delighted with his mysterious contributor. Men speculate about who Silence Dogood might be. Benjamin, setting the type for his own essays, keeps silent. The secret is intoxicating. For the first time in his life, his words matter. People are reading what he's written, discussing it, taking it seriously. And they don't know he's just an apprentice, just a boy. Fought in silence. Dogood letters appear between April and October 1722. Then James discovers the truth. Perhaps Benjamin grows careless, or perhaps James simply recognizes his brother in the prose style. The beating that follows is severe. James feels humiliated. His younger brother has been making a fool of him for months. Worse, Benjamin has been praised throughout Boston, while James remained ignorant. Beyond the beating, something breaks between the brothers. James forbids Benjamin from writing anything for the Courant. The print shop becomes a prison. Benjamin is 17 now, with 4 more years of servitude ahead of him. The relationship curdles into hatred. They are too similar, both stubborn, both proud, both convinced of their own rightness. But only one has legal power, and James wields it without mercy. In June 1723, the Courant publishes something that pushes the authorities too far. James is arrested for abuse of government, spends a month in jail, and is forbidden from printing the Courant without prior approval. The solution James finds is clever. He'll publish the Courant under Benjamin's name, making it appear the apprentice is now publisher. To make this legal, James officially cancels Benjamin's indenture papers. But Benjamin must secretly sign new papers kept private to maintain James's actual control. This creates an opportunity. Benjamin now holds cancelled indenture papers, showing he's free, while the secret papers binding him exist only between him and James. And if James tries to produce those secret papers to reclaim his runaway apprentice, he'll expose his own scheme to evade the government. In September 1723, after a particularly vicious fight, Benjamin makes his decision. He will run away. It's illegal. Breaking an apprentice contract is a crime, but the peculiar legal situation makes pursuit nearly impossible. Benjamin sells some books to raise money for passage. He can't leave openly. Transporting a runaway apprentice is illegal. He convinces a friend to secretly arrange passage to New York, telling the captain Benjamin has gotten a girl pregnant and must leave town. He leaves Boston in the night, carrying almost nothing. 17 years old, legally a fugitive, leaving behind his family, the only city he's ever known. The ship sails down the coast. Benjamin watches Boston's lights recede into darkness. New York offers nothing. The only printer there, William Bradford, has no work. But Bradford mentions that his son Andrew runs a print shop in Philadelphia and might need help. Philadelphia, 2 days' journey. A Quaker city, more tolerant than Puritan Boston, growing rapidly, full of possibility. Benjamin makes the journey in October 1723. It's a disaster. The boat runs aground. He walks 50 miles through rain and mud, arrives in Philadelphia on a Sunday morning exhausted, filthy, with exactly $1 and about a shilling in copper in his pocket. He walks up Market Street from the wharf, looking for a bakery. He asks for 3 pennies worth of bread and receives 3 great puffy rolls, far more than he expected. He tucks one under each arm and eats the third as he walks, staring at this strange new city. He passes a house where a girl stands in the doorway, watching him. Deborah Reed, 15 years old, amused by the ridiculous spectacle of this muddy boy with bread under his arms. She will remember this moment. He will too. He has escaped. He has nothing, no money, no position, no connections, no legal right to be here. His brother could demand his return, though enforcing that across colonial boundaries would be difficult. He is alone in a city that doesn't know him, carrying skills but no credentials, ambition but no immediate prospects. But he is free, and for Benjamin Franklin, that is enough. That is everything. The question is what to build from this freedom, how to transform escape into arrival, how to make himself into something this new city will value, will need, will eventually be unable to imagine itself without. The answer will take time, but he has time now. Time and will, and an absolutely ungovernable conviction that he will not return to servitude, will not accept limitation, will not be bound by the circumstances of his birth or the authority of those who assume they have the right to command his labor and silence his voice. He finishes the roll. He looks around at Philadelphia, at the possibilities it contains, and he begins. Philadelphia, in October 1723, is a city of about 10,000 souls, smaller than Boston but growing faster, built on a grid plan between 2 rivers, the Delaware and the Schuylkill. William Penn founded it, barely 40 years earlier, as a Quaker refuge, a holy experiment in religious tolerance. That tolerance has made it a magnet for the dispossessed and ambitious. It's a commercial city, less concerned with theology than Boston, more interested in profit and practical improvement. Benjamin Franklin, 17, dirty, clutching his absurd rolls, walks these streets for the first time and feels something like recognition. This is a place where a person might reinvent himself, where origins matter less than effort. He finds work immediately at Samuel Keimer's print shop. Keimer is an odd character, a former Quaker turned adherent of various mystical doctrines, wearing a long beard, prone to enthusiasms and depressions. His equipment is poor, but he recognizes Franklin's skill and hires him on the spot. He finds lodging at the Reed House on Market Street, the same house where Deborah Reed stood watching him arrive with bread under his arms. She's 15, lively, pretty in a wholesome way. Benjamin and Deborah begin a courtship that is not quite a courtship. He's too poor for marriage, too uncertain of his future, but there's an understanding between them. Then Governor William Keith enters Franklin's life like a fairy godfather bearing impossible promises. Keith is the royal governor of Pennsylvania, charming, ambitious, and catastrophically bad with money. He hears about the young printer and decides to take an interest. In November 1723, Keith appears at Keimer's shop, asking for Franklin. A governor doesn't visit print shops to chat with apprentices, but Keith has a proposition. Philadelphia needs a better printer than Keimer. Franklin clearly has the skills. Keith will set him up in business. Provide letters of credit to buy equipment in London. Guarantee the necessary loans. Ensure his success. All Franklin needs to do is sail to London, purchase a printing press and type, and return to establish himself. Franklin, 17 years old, believes him. Why wouldn't he? Keith is the governor. His promises are detailed, specific, repeated. When Franklin's father Josiah visits Philadelphia and refuses to support the scheme, seeing through Keith's empty promises with the clarity of experience, Keith dismisses the objection. He'll support Franklin himself. Franklin sails for London in November 1724, age 18. The voyage takes weeks. He reads, writes, conducts experiments on the ship's movement through water. The Atlantic is vast, grey, indifferent. He's crossing an ocean on the promise of a man he barely knows. They arrive in London just before Christmas, 1724. Franklin goes to collect his letters of credit from the captain, who was supposedly carrying them. There are no letters, no credit, no money. Keith has sent nothing. Betrayal is complete. Franklin learns later that this is Keith's pattern. The governor makes extravagant promises to everyone and never follows through. He's a fantasist who believes his own inventions until reality makes them impossible to sustain. Franklin is stranded in London, the largest city in the world, with no resources and no way home. But he survives. He finds work at Palmer's printing house, then at Watts, two of London's major print shops. The work is harder than anything in Philadelphia. London printers are fast, skilled, demanding. Franklin learns. He swims in the Thames, demonstrating his technique to astonished Londoners. He writes a philosophical pamphlet arguing that virtue and vice are meaningless distinctions, a youthful piece of atheistic reasoning he'll later regret. London is revelation and education. The theatres, the coffee houses, the sheer density of minds and commerce and possibility. But it's also expensive, exhausting, and ultimately not home. After 18 months, Franklin has saved enough for passage back. He sails in July 1726, working as a clerk to a Quaker merchant named Denham, who has offered him employment in Philadelphia. He arrives to find everything changed. Deborah Reed, tired of waiting, has married a man named John Rogers, a potter with a violent temper and no prospects. The marriage is immediately disastrous. Rogers runs through Deborah's small dowry, possibly steals money, and flees Philadelphia to escape debts, leaving Deborah in legal limbo, married but abandoned, unable to divorce, unable to remarry without risking bigamy charges. Franklin works for Denham until Denham dies suddenly in 1727. Then, with a partner named Hugh Meredith, whose father puts up the money, Franklin opens his own print shop. This is the beginning of the construction, the careful architecture of Benjamin Franklin as public figure. He works visibly, ostentatiously. He pushes a wheelbarrow of paper through the streets himself, so people will see his industry. He dresses plainly, avoids taverns, cultivates a reputation for sobriety and reliability. It's performance, calculated and precise. Franklin understands that in a commercial city, reputation is capital. In 1727, he founds the Junto, a club for mutual improvement. A dozen young tradesmen and craftsmen, not the wealthy, not the established, but ambitious men like himself. They meet weekly to discuss philosophy, science, politics, morality. Each member must write essays, propose topics for debate, share knowledge. It's part study group, part networking society, part experiment in collective self-improvement. The questions they debate are practical and abstract. How can we improve Philadelphia? What is the nature of virtue? Should paper money be encouraged? Franklin is building something here. Not just a business, but a network, a reputation, a version of himself that Philadelphia will find valuable. The boy who arrived with bread under his arms is becoming the industrious printer, the rational tradesman, the civic-minded citizen. By 1728, he's established enough to buy out Meredith's partnership, becoming sole proprietor. He's 22 years old. The shop is successful, growing, gaining customers who value quality work and reliable delivery. And there's Deborah, still legally married to Rogers, still unable to properly remarry, still living in her mother's house. They've resumed their relationship, careful, complicated by law and propriety. Rogers is rumored to be dead in the West Indies, but there's no proof. If Deborah remarries and Rogers returns, she could be prosecuted for bigamy. The situation is impossible according to law, but simple according to need. In September 1730, Franklin and Deborah begin living together as husband and wife in a common law marriage. There's no ceremony, no legal documentation, just the mutual decision to build a life together despite the obstacles the law places in their way. It's practical, like everything Franklin does. Deborah is not brilliant, not his intellectual equal, not someone who can follow his philosophical flights, but she's loyal, hard-working, willing to help in the print shop, and genuinely fond of him. In an era when marriage is mostly about economic partnership, this is enough. Franklin is 24 years old. He has a wife, a business, a growing reputation, a network of friends and associates. The boy who fled Boston with nothing has built something real, something solid, something that might last. But the building has only just begun. The question, what else he might construct? What other hungers might be satisfied? What other possibilities exist beyond the print shop and the modest house on Market Street? The common law marriage to Deborah in September 1730 brings Franklin something he didn't quite know he needed: domestic stability. The household they establish is modest but functional. Deborah runs the shop's accounts, sells stationery and books, manages the home. She's practical, capable, utterly devoted. What she lacks in education and refinement, she compensates for with loyalty and relentless work ethic. Into this household, Franklin brings a son, William, born around 1730 or 1731, to a mother whose identity Franklin never publicly acknowledges. The circumstances remain obscure. Perhaps a servant, perhaps a woman of low station, perhaps someone Franklin paid to keep silent. Deborah accepts the boy, raises him as her own. It's a testament to her character, or her pragmatism, or perhaps simply the limited choices available to a woman in her position. William becomes part of the Franklin household, acknowledged, educated, loved even, though the mystery of his origins will shadow him throughout his life. In October 1732, Deborah gives birth to Francis Folger Franklin, called Frankie. Now there are two boys in the house on Market Street, William and Frankie. And for a brief time, Franklin experiences something approaching conventional family life. The printing business expands steadily. In 1729, Franklin had purchased the Pennsylvania Gazette from Keimer, who was failing financially. Under Franklin's management, the Gazette becomes the colony's leading newspaper, well-written, carefully edited, more entertaining than its competitors. Franklin writes much of the content himself under various pseudonyms, creating letters to the editor, humorous pieces, debates between fictional characters. The paper is profitable, but more importantly, it gives Franklin influence. A newspaper shapes opinion, determines what's discussed, what's considered important. Then, in December 1732, Franklin launches Poor Richard's Almanac. The almanac is a calculated commercial venture. Every colonial household needs an almanac. They provide the calendar, astronomical information, weather predictions, practical tips. Franklin creates Poor Richard, a fictional astronomer who is henpecked by his wife and desperate for money. The voice is folksy, self-deprecating, infinitely quotable. The aphorisms Franklin creates for Poor Richard will become his most enduring literary legacy, though few people will remember they're Franklin's inventions, rather than collected folk wisdom. Early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. A penny saved is a penny earned. God helps them that help themselves. They sound ancient, proverbial, but they're Franklin's constructions, carefully crafted to sound like common sense while encoding his particular philosophy of self-improvement, frugality, and rational self-interest. Poor Richard's Almanac sells 10,000 copies a year, an enormous number for colonial America. It makes Franklin wealthy, or at least comfortable. The profit margins on almanacs are excellent, cheap to produce, sold at a premium, with built-in annual obsolescence, requiring customers to purchase the new edition each year. But Franklin's genius isn't just in creating successful publications, it's in scaling. He develops a franchise model, setting up printers throughout the colonies, in Charleston, in New York, in Antigua. He provides equipment and expertise, takes a percentage of the profits. The partners do the work. Franklin accumulates wealth with minimal additional effort. By the late 1730s, Franklin has printing partnerships in 6 cities. The income streams multiply. The household on Market Street prospers. Franklin can afford better clothes. Though he continues to dress plainly, the appearance of industry is part of his brand. He can afford to buy more books, to spend money on scientific equipment, to donate to civic causes. The candle maker's son is becoming wealthy and doing so in a way that appears to be the natural result of hard work and virtue rather than luck or exploitation. Then, in November 1736, catastrophe. Francis Folger. Franklin, 4 years old, contracts smallpox. The disease moves quickly. The fever, the characteristic pustules, the child's body struggling against an infection it cannot fight. Within days, Frankie is dead. The grief is crushing. Deborah is devastated, inconsolable. Franklin's grief is compounded by guilt. Inoculation against smallpox exists, a primitive form that involves deliberately infecting a person with a mild case to produce immunity. It's controversial, dangerous, sometimes fatal, but it works more often than it kills. Franklin had intended to inoculate Frankie, but delayed, perhaps because the boy was sick with something else, perhaps from simple procrastination. And in that delay, Frankie encountered smallpox naturally and died. Franklin will write about this decision for years afterward, will become an advocate for inoculation, will try to prevent other parents from making the same mistake. But nothing brings Frankie back. The small body is buried. Deborah withdraws into grief. The house on Market Street becomes quieter, sadder, marked by absence. In 1743, Deborah gives birth to a daughter, Sarah, called Sally. She will be their only surviving child together. Sally becomes the focus of Deborah's maternal energy, protected, perhaps overprotected, raised with the constant awareness that children are fragile, that death waits behind every fever. Through all of this, the expansion of business, the loss of Frankie, the birth of Sally, Franklin continues his methodical construction of civic infrastructure. In 1731, he founds the Library Company of Philadelphia, a subscription library where members pool resources to purchase books no individual could afford alone. It's the first lending library in America, a radical democratization of knowledge. Books that previously belonged only to the wealthy become accessible to any tradesman who can afford the modest subscription fee. In 1736, he organizes the Union Fire Company, Philadelphia's first volunteer fire brigade. 30 men agree to keep buckets and bags ready, to respond to fires, to help each other in times of crisis. It's practical. Philadelphia is built of wood, and fire is a constant threat. But it's also social engineering. The fire company creates bonds of mutual obligation, transforms neighbors into a community. In 1747, when the colony faces possible attack during King George's War, Franklin organizes a volunteer militia. Pennsylvania's Quaker Assembly refuses to fund military defense on religious grounds. But Franklin convinces 10,000 men to sign up, to drill, to prepare. He writes pamphlets arguing that defense is a civic duty, that pacifism is a luxury afforded by others' willingness to fight. The militia is never tested in battle, but its existence demonstrates Franklin's growing political influence. Each of these initiatives, the library, Zakon the Gamiha, fire company, the militia, serves multiple purposes. They address genuine civic needs, yes, but they also build Franklin's network, enhance his reputation, create social capital he can draw on later. Franklin is never purely altruistic, but neither is he purely self-interested. He genuinely believes that individual success and collective improvement are intertwined, that a rising tide lifts all boats, that making Philadelphia better makes his own life better. By 1740, at age 34, Franklin has achieved what he set out to achieve. He's wealthy, respected, influential. The print shop runs itself, requiring less of his direct attention. The investments and partnerships generate reliable income. He has time now, time to think about what comes next, what else life might offer beyond the accumulation of money and reputation. The question forming in his mind is this: what happens when a man achieves his material goals while still in the prime of life? What does a person do with freedom, with leisure, with the luxury of pursuing curiosity for its own sake? The answer will transform him from a successful tradesman into something else entirely: a natural philosopher, a scientist, a man whose name will be known not just in Philadelphia, but in London, in Paris, throughout the civilized world. But that transformation is still ahead. For now, there is the print shop, the family, the city he's helping to build, and the quiet, persistent question of what else might be possible. In 1748, at age 42, Benjamin Franklin retires from active management of the printing business. It's a calculated decision, made possible by years of careful investment and the franchise model that generates income without requiring his daily presence. He takes David Hall, a skilled printer from London, as partner. Hall will run the Pennsylvania Gazette and the print shop, paying Franklin half the profits for the next 18 years. The arrangement is generous to both men. Hall gets an established business. Franklin gets approximately £650 a year, enough to live comfortably without working. Franklin steps away from the counter, the press, the daily rhythms of commerce. He's worked since age 10, 32 years of labor. Now he wants time to think, to experiment, to pursue questions that have no immediate commercial application. He wants, in the language of his era, to become a gentleman, not through birth or title, but through the freedom to direct his own attention toward matters of the mind. The transition begins with practical invention. In 1741, Franklin designs an iron stove that heats rooms more efficiently than traditional fireplaces. The Franklin stove, though he never calls it that, uses a clever arrangement of baffles to circulate hot air while venting smoke. It burns less wood, produces more heat, reduces the risk of chimney fires. It's an immediate success. The governor of Pennsylvania offers Franklin a patent, which would give him exclusive rights to manufacture and profit from the design. Franklin refuses. His reasoning, which he'll explain later in his autobiography, is that we benefit from the inventions of others, so we should allow others to benefit from ours. It's a philosophy of open knowledge, of collective progress over individual profit. The decision costs him money, but earns him reputation. The disinterested inventor, the public-spirited citizen, the man who gives away what others would hoard. But the stove is just a beginning, a practical prelude to something larger. In 1746, Franklin encounters electricity. A traveling lecturer named Archibald Spencer visits Philadelphia, demonstrating electrical phenomena, sparks drawn from charged objects, small shocks delivered to volunteers, glass rods that attract bits of paper. The demonstrations are entertainment, parlor tricks, but Franklin sees something else. He sees a natural force that is clearly real, but utterly mysterious. Something that follows laws, but laws that remain undiscovered. He's 40 years old, and for the first time since childhood, he feels the pure hunger of curiosity, unattached to utility. He begins experimenting. The library company purchases electrical apparatus from London, glass tubes, silk cloths for generating static charge, Leyden jars for storing electrical charge, Franklin's house on Market Street becomes a laboratory. He recruits friends from the Junto to assist. They spend hours rubbing glass, drawing sparks, trying to understand what electricity is and how it behaves. Deborah watches all of this with bewilderment and growing loneliness. Her husband has become obsessed with invisible forces, with phenomena she cannot see or understand. He tries to explain positive and negative charges, the flow of electrical fluid, the principles of attraction and repulsion. But the language is foreign to her. She married a printer, a man whose work she could comprehend and assist. Now he's become something else, someone who speaks a language she doesn't know, who corresponds with men in London and Paris she'll never meet, who is present in body but absent in attention. Their daughter Sally, born in 1743, becomes Deborah's focus and consolation. The girl is bright, affectionate, responsive in ways that Franklin, increasingly absorbed in his experiments, is not. Father and daughter love each other, but there's a distance even in their affection. Sally will grow up knowing her father as a figure of importance. Man admired by others, but also as someone whose mind is always partly elsewhere, chasing questions she cannot follow. The electrical experiments continue. Franklin develops a theory. Electricity is not two different fluids, but a single fluid that can be present in excess, positive, or deficit, negative. Objects can be charged by transferring this electrical fluid from one body to another. The theory is elegant, explanatory, and largely correct. He demonstrates it through careful experiments, documenting everything in letters to Peter Collinson, a Quaker merchant in London who shares Franklin's curiosity about natural philosophy. Collinson reads Franklin's letters to the Royal Society of London, the preeminent scientific organization in the world. The response is mixed. Some dismiss the colonial tradesman's theories, others find them intriguing but unproven. Franklin, in Philadelphia, continues experimenting, refining his ideas, accumulating evidence. Then comes the crucial insight. Lightning is electrical. The signs are unmistakable. The spark, the crack, the ability to set things aflame. Even the smell after a lightning strike resembles the smell of electrical discharge in the laboratory. If lightning is electrical, then thunderclouds must be electrically charged. An pointed rod extended into the air should be able to draw that charge down to Earth safely. Franklin proposes the kite experiment in 1750, though he won't conduct it until 1752. He suggests installing lightning rods on buildings, pointed metal rods extending above the roof, connected by a wire to the ground, providing a path for lightning to discharge harmlessly into the earth, rather than setting the building ablaze. The idea is revolutionary and controversial. Some clergymen argue that lightning is God's judgment, that attempting to deflect it is impious. Franklin responds with characteristic pragmatism. God also sends rain, but we still use umbrellas. Besides, if God wanted lightning to strike a particular building, surely an omnipotent deity could work around human interventions. The experiments in Philadelphia become more sophisticated. Franklin and his collaborators, particularly Ebenezer Kinnersley, a former Baptist minister turned scientific lecturer, develop demonstrations of electrical phenomena. They electrify metal objects, create artificial lightning in miniature, kill turkeys with electrical shock, an experiment Franklin finds both fascinating and disturbing. They build batteries from linked Leyden jars, storing enough charge to produce substantial sparks. In 1751, Franklin's letters on electricity are published in London as a book, Experiments and Observations on Electricity. The response transforms his life. What skeptics in the Royal Society had dismissed becomes imprint, undeniable evidence of systematic investigation and theoretical insight. European scientists begin replicating Franklin's experiments. The theories hold. The predictions prove accurate. In 1753, Franklin is awarded the Copley Medal, the Royal Society's highest honor. In 1756, he's elected as a Fellow of the Royal Society. The printer from Philadelphia, the tradesman with 2 years of formal education, is now recognized as a legitimate contributor to natural philosophy, corresponding as an equal with the greatest scientific minds in Europe. This is fame of a different order than anything Franklin has experienced. It's not wealth. The electrical experiments earn him nothing financially. It's not political power. He remains a private citizen of a colonial city. It's intellectual recognition, the immortality of ideas. His name will be associated with the understanding of electricity for as long as the science exists. People who have never visited Philadelphia, who will never read Poor Richard's Almanac, who don't know about the fire company or the library, know about Franklin's electrical experiments. The realization is intoxicating and isolating. Franklin has transcended his circumstances, has proven that genius can emerge from anywhere, that a candle maker's son can advance human understanding as surely as any Cambridge-educated gentleman. But the transcendence separates him from the people around him, from Deborah, who cannot follow where his mind goes, from his daughter Sally, growing up with a father whose attention is divided, from Philadelphia itself, which knows him as the successful printer, but cannot quite grasp what he's becoming. At 45, Franklin stands between worlds. He's too prominent to return to simple trade, too curious to be satisfied with a wealth and civic leadership, too American to be fully accepted in European scientific circles, too cosmopolitan to be content with provincial life. The question is, what to do with this strange position, this uncomfortable elevation? The answer, when it comes, will pull him further from home, deeper into a world of ideas and politics and international significance. But it will also pull him further from Deborah, from the domestic happiness he's already half abandoned in pursuit of understanding. The price of transcendence is always paid at home, in the quiet loneliness of those left behind. In 1751, Franklin is elected to the Pennsylvania Assembly, the colony's legislative body. He's 45 years old, wealthy enough to serve without salary, prominent enough that his election is essentially inevitable. The Assembly meets in the State House, later called Independence Hall, debating taxes, roads, defense, the mundane machinery of colonial governance. Franklin takes to the work naturally. He's good at committees, at negotiation, at finding compromises that allow competing factions to claim partial victory. But provincial politics feels small compared to the questions beginning to preoccupy him. The colonies are separate entities, different governments, different interests, often working at cross purposes. Franklin begins to wonder whether they might be stronger unified, at least for purposes of common defense and mutual benefit. In June 1754, representatives from 7 colonies meet in Albany, New York, to discuss relations with the Iroquois Confederacy and coordinate defense against French encroachment from Canada. Franklin arrives with a proposal he's been developing, a plan of union. The idea is elegant in its simplicity. Create a Grand Council representing all the colonies, with a President General appointed by the Crown. The Council would manage defense, Indian relations, and Western settlement. Each colony would retain internal autonomy, but in matters of common concern, they would act as one. Franklin presents the plan with careful reasoning. The colonies are weak separately, vulnerable to French military superiority. United, they would have the resources and population to defend themselves, to expand westward, to become something more than scattered settlements clinging to the Atlantic coast. The Albany Congress approves Franklin's plan unanimously. Then it dies. Every colonial assembly rejects it. Too much power surrendered to a central authority. The Crown rejects it. Too much power retained by colonial representatives. Franklin will later write with characteristic irony that since both sides rejected it for opposite reasons, the plan must have been exactly right. But exactly right in politics is often exactly useless. The plan of union becomes a document, an idea, a template that will wait 2 decades before circumstances make union not just advisable, but necessary. That same year, 1753, Franklin is appointed Deputy Postmaster General for the Northern Colonies, sharing the position with William Hunter of Virginia. It's a Crown appointment, carrying a salary and considerable authority. Franklin throws himself into postal reform with the same systematic approach he brings to everything. He improves roads, establishes new routes, creates a system of relay riders that speeds mail delivery from weeks to days. He personally travels thousands of miles on horseback, inspecting postal routes, meeting postmasters, observing how the system works and how it might work better. The postal service becomes profitable for the first time in colonial history. But more importantly, it becomes infrastructure, binding the colonies together through regular communication, creating networks of correspondence, making it possible for someone in Boston to reliably communicate with someone in Charleston. Franklin is building, whether he fully realizes it, the nervous system of a nation that doesn't yet exist. Meanwhile, in Pennsylvania, Franklin enters into conflict with the Penn family. Thomas Penn and his brother Richard are the proprietors of Pennsylvania. They inherited the colony from their father, William Penn, and they own it, literally, as private property. They collect rents, they approve laws, they exercise feudal authority over territory the size of England, and they refuse to allow their lands to be taxed, even as the colony desperately needs revenue for defense. Franklin finds this arrangement increasingly intolerable. The Penns live in London, contributing nothing to Pennsylvania's defense or development, extracting wealth while bearing no civic burden. It violates everything Franklin believes about merit, about the earned rather than inherited, about the proper relationship between privilege and responsibility. The conflict escalates through the mid-1750s. The Assembly, which Franklin increasingly dominates through force of intellect and political skill, passes tax bills that include proprietary lands. The Penn brothers veto them. The colony remains unable to fund adequate defense, even as the French and Indian War brings violence to the frontier, even as settlers are killed in raids that better funded defenses might prevent. In 1757, the Assembly decides to send an agent to London to negotiate directly with the Penns and, if necessary, petition the Crown to revoke their proprietary rights. The choice of agent is obvious. Franklin has the intellect, the diplomatic skills, and increasingly, the international reputation to be taken seriously in London. He's already a Fellow of the Royal Society. The British know his name. Franklin accepts the mission. The plan is to be gone perhaps a year, 18 months at most. He'll negotiate with the Penns, resolve the taxation question, and return to Philadelphia. It's a civic duty, an opportunity, and also, though he doesn't quite admit this, an escape. An escape from the growing staleness of Philadelphia, from the provincial limitations of colonial politics, from a domestic life that has settled into routine. Deborah will not accompany him. She's terrified of sea travel, the weeks on the ocean, the possibility of shipwreck, the sheer distance from everything familiar. Franklin urges her to reconsider, argues that London will be an adventure, that Sally, now 14, would benefit from exposure to a larger world. Deborah refuses. She will stay in Philadelphia, manage the household, wait for his return. Perhaps there's more to her refusal than fear of sailing. Perhaps Deborah understands, in some inarticulate way, that if she goes to London, she'll be out of place, will be revealed as the provincial shopkeeper's daughter she is, will not fit into the world of Royal Society dinners and philosophical salons that her husband now inhabits. In Philadelphia, she's Mrs. Franklin, wife of the prominent citizen. In London, she would be nobody, the uneducated woman trailing behind her celebrated husband. So they separate. On June the 4th, 1757, Franklin boards the packet ship bound for England. Deborah and Sally stand on the dock, watching the ship pull away. Franklin is 51 years old. He's leaving behind his wife, his daughter, his home, his city, expecting to return in a year or so. He will be gone 5 years. This is when the pattern establishes itself, the structure that will define the Franklin marriage for the rest of Deborah's life. Continents between them, letters crossing in the mail, intimacy maintained through written words rather than physical presence. They will write to each other regularly. Franklin's letters full of news from London, descriptions of people met and dinners attended. Deborah's letters full of domestic details, repairs to the house, Sally's activities, the ordinary business of daily life. But letters are not presents. Letters are not the weight of another person in bed beside you, are not conversation over breakfast, are not the accumulated small decisions and shared experiences that constitute a marriage. Deborah is 49 years old when Franklin leaves. She will wait for him, will manage his business affairs, will defend his reputation, will remain absolutely faithful. But she will wait alone, growing older, watching other couples navigate life together while she navigates it through correspondence. Franklin, on the ship crossing the Atlantic, is thinking about the negotiations ahead, about the Penns and their unreasonable claims to privilege, about the Royal Society and the scientific conversations he'll soon rejoin. He's thinking, perhaps, about Deborah and Sally receding behind him, but also about the larger world opening ahead. He's 51, at an age when most men are settling into the limitations of their achievements. Franklin is convinced his most important work is still ahead of him. He's not wrong, but the cost of that work, the price paid in domestic happiness, in time with his daughter, in the slow dissolution of his marriage into an exchange of letters, is something he hasn't fully calculated. Or perhaps he has calculated it and decided the cost is acceptable. The ship sails east, toward London, toward complications and achievements Franklin cannot yet imagine. Behind him, in Philadelphia, Deborah goes home to the empty house on Market Street, to the rooms that suddenly feel too large, to the beginning of a waiting that will last, in various forms, for the rest of her life. Franklin arrives in London in July 1757, 51 years old, stepping off the ship into the greatest city in the world. London in 1757 has perhaps 500,000 inhabitants, 70 times larger than Philadelphia, dense with humanity and commerce and history. The streets are narrow, crowded, perpetually noisy. Carriages clatter over cobblestones. Street vendors call out their wares. The Thames carries ships from every corner of the globe. The smell is intense. Coal smoke, horse dung, the river at low tide, humanity packed into insufficient space. It's overwhelming and intoxicating. Franklin takes lodgings at 36 Craven Street, a 4-story townhouse near the Thames, run by Margaret Stevenson, a widow in her 40s. The arrangement includes room and board for Franklin and his son William, who has accompanied him. The house is comfortable, respectable, in a good neighborhood near Charing Cross. Mrs. Stevenson is intelligent, well-read, capable of managing a household while engaging in conversation about ideas. She has a daughter, Mary, called Polly, 18 years old, bright, curious, unmarried. Polly Stevenson becomes, over the coming years, something Deborah never was, an intellectual companion. She asks Franklin about his experiments, reads his papers, poses questions that demonstrate genuine understanding. Franklin responds with long letters explaining scientific principles, the nature of tides, the behavior of sound waves, the theory of color. He writes to Polly with a pedagogical care he never quite manages with his own daughter Sally, perhaps because Polly seeks this knowledge while Sally accepts her father's authority without questioning it. It's not a romance, exactly. Franklin is 51, Polly 18, and Margaret Stevenson is always present, watchful. But it's an intimacy, a meeting of minds that feeds something in Franklin that his marriage doesn't. He's careful to write to Deborah about Mrs. Stevenson and Polly, to make the relationships transparent, to forestall suspicion. But the letters to Deborah grow less frequent as the months pass, more perfunctory, full of news but empty of intimacy. Franklin's days in London divide into 2 distinct lives. By day, he's the colonial agent, negotiating with the Penn family and their representatives, petitioning Parliament, navigating the machinery of British government. The negotiations with the Penns are frustrating, circular, achieving little. Thomas Penn is stubborn, arrogant, convinced of his absolute right to govern Pennsylvania as he sees fit. Franklin finds him contemptible, the heir to a great man's legacy who contributes nothing beyond inherited privilege. But by evening and morning, Franklin inhabits a different world. He conducts electrical experiments, investigates the nature of heat, studies the behavior of sound through different media. He writes papers for the Royal Society, attends their meetings, engages in the great debates of natural philosophy. The British scientific establishment, initially skeptical of the colonial tradesman, comes to accept him as a peer. His work on electricity is too substantial to dismiss, his mind too sharp to condescend to. He forms friendships with the era's great thinkers. David Hume, the Scottish philosopher, becomes a correspondent and friend. They debate theology, causation, the foundations of morality. Adam Smith, whose theory of moral sentiments appears in 1759, discusses with Franklin the nature of commerce and self-interest. Joseph Priestley, the radical theologian and chemist, finds in Franklin a sympathetic mind. These men regard Franklin as a curiosity, a self-taught American who somehow speaks their language, who can hold his own in conversations about metaphysics and physics and political economy. There's a subtle condescension in how the British treat him, even those who respect him. He's the American genius, impressive for a provincial, remarkable considering his lack of formal education. The implication is always there. Imagine what he might have been with proper training, with Oxford or Cambridge, with the advantages of British civilization. Franklin feels this, resents it quietly, but also uses it. Being underestimated is a form of advantage. In 1759, Franklin receives honorary degrees from the University of St. Andrews in Scotland and the University of Oxford. He becomes Dr. Franklin, though the title is honorary rather than earned through formal study. The recognition matters to him more than he quite admits. The candlemaker's son, the runaway apprentice, is now addressed as doctor by men who attended the great universities, who were born to privilege. He travels extensively. Scotland in 1759, where he's received with genuine warmth, where the universities honor him and the Edinburgh intellectuals treat him as an equal without the subtle condescension he encounters in London. He loves Scotland, considers it the most enlightened part of Britain. He travels to the continent, Holland, Belgium, examining universities and scientific institutions, meeting natural philosophers, building networks. With each journey, Philadelphia recedes further in memory and imagination. London feels more like home than the city he left behind. The conversations here engage him in ways Philadelphia's never quite did. The junto was provincial compared to the Royal Society. The Pennsylvania Assembly's debates about taxation seem petty compared to discussions of the British Empire's future, of the philosophical foundations of government, of the cutting edge of natural science. The electrical experiments continue. Franklin investigates lightning's effects on different materials, studies the nature of heat and its transfer, examines how sound behaves in various media. He's no longer just an enthusiast, but a recognized contributor to natural philosophy, someone whose papers are read and cited throughout Europe. The fame that began with the kite experiment has solidified into lasting reputation. Letters arrive from Deborah, crossing the Atlantic in 8 weeks if weather is favorable, longer if not. She writes about the house, about repairs needed, about Sally's activities. She misses him, she says. She wishes he would come home. Franklin writes back with news from London, with descriptions of dinners and scientific meetings, with promises that he'll return soon as the negotiations with the Penns are resolved. But the negotiations drag on, and if Franklin is being honest with himself, which he isn't quite, he's not pushing for resolution with all the urgency the Pennsylvania Assembly expects. Because resolution means leaving London, returning to Philadelphia, re-entering the smaller life he left behind. The realization is uncomfortable. He belongs more here than there. He's more himself in London than in Philadelphia, more fully engaged, more alive to possibility. William, his son, thrives in London as well. At age 28 or so, William has social graces. Franklin cultivated deliberately, but William possesses naturally. He moves easily in English society, makes friends, pursues connections. Franklin secures for William a commission as captain in the colonial militia, then begins quietly maneuvering for something better, perhaps a royal governorship, perhaps some position that would establish William permanently in the British imperial system. 5 years stretch ahead, though Franklin doesn't know it yet. 5 years in which Deborah will wait in Philadelphia, will manage his business affairs, will grow older in his absence. 5 years in which Franklin will become more British than American, more cosmopolitan than provincial, more committed to the empire's success than to Pennsylvania's particular interests. The separation is hardening into something permanent, though neither Franklin nor Deborah has acknowledged it. They remain married in law and in their own understanding. But the marriage exists now, primarily on paper, in letters that cross the ocean, in financial arrangements and legal documents. The daily intimacy, the physical presence, the shared life, all of that is dissolving into memory. Franklin is 55 now. London has claimed him in ways Philadelphia never quite could. The question is whether he'll recognize this, whether he'll choose to return to the life he left behind or find reasons to extend his stay, to remain in the world that fits him better. The answer, when it comes, will hurt people he loves. But the answer is already forming, already inevitable in the pattern of choices he's making without quite admitting what those choices mean. Franklin returns to Philadelphia in November 1762 after 5 years in London. The voyage is difficult. Winter storms, delays, the ship nearly wrecked on rocks. He's 56 years old, coming home to a city that feels both familiar and foreign, like a place he once knew well, but can no longer quite inhabit. Deborah is 54, visibly aged by the years of waiting. Her health has declined, headaches, fainting spells, what she describes as a lowness of spirits that might be depression. She's gained weight, moves more slowly, seems diminished in ways beyond the simple passage of time. 5 years of letters have not prepared Franklin for the physical reality of her decline, for the guilt he feels seeing what his absence has cost her. The house on Market Street feels smaller than he remembers. The rooms that once seemed adequate now feel cramped after years in the spacious townhouse on Craven Street. Philadelphia itself feels provincial, the conversations less sophisticated, the pace slower, the intellectual life thin compared to London's Royal Society and coffee-house debates. Franklin tries to settle back into his old routines, but it's like wearing a coat that no longer quite fits. Sally is 19 now, a young woman rather than the 14-year-old he left behind. She's lively, sociable, devoted to her mother. The relationship between father and daughter is affectionate but formal, marked by the years of separation. Franklin has missed the crucial years of her becoming, and the absence cannot be recovered. The political situation in Pennsylvania has deteriorated. The frontier is violent. Colonists pushing west into Indian territory, Indians retaliating, settlers killed in brutal raids. In December 1763, a group of frontier vigilantes called the Paxton Boys massacre a village of peaceful Conestoga Indians, then march on Philadelphia, threatening to kill more Indians sheltered there. Franklin helps organize the city's defense, then meets with the Paxton Boys, persuading them to disperse. The incident reveals the colony's fractures: East versus West, settled versus frontier. Those who want accommodation with Indians versus those who want extermination. In 1763, Franklin makes a journey through the northern colonies, his first visit to New England since fleeing Boston at age 17, 40 years earlier. It's a journey of reconciliation. He visits his brother James's widow and children in Newport, makes peace with the family he abandoned. He sees Boston with different eyes, still Puritan, still provincial, but also the city that formed him, that gave him the hunger that drove him to Philadelphia and beyond. During this trip, Franklin is appointed as agent not just for Pennsylvania, but for Georgia, New Jersey, and Massachusetts as well. 4 colonies now pay him to represent their interests in London. The appointments are honors, but they're also complications. The colonies have different interests, different grievances, different visions of their relationship with Britain. In November 1764, Franklin returns to London. Again, Deborah refuses to sail. The pattern repeats. The departure from the dock, the wife and daughter watching the ship pull away, the husband sailing east toward the larger world. But this time, there's a difference. Franklin is not going to resolve a specific dispute and return. He's going to London because London is where he belongs, where his work is, where his life makes sense. The temporary mission has become permanent residence. William is now Royal Governor of New Jersey, appointed in 1762 through Franklin's careful cultivation of connections. Father and son have both achieved positions of authority within the British imperial system. They collect crown salaries. They work to strengthen the bonds between colonies and mother country. They are, in effect, British officials who happen to reside in America. The Craven Street lodgings welcome Franklin back. Mrs. Stevenson and Polly are there. Polly now married to a physician named William Hewson, but still intellectually engaged, still exchanging ideas with Franklin. This household feels more like home than the one he left behind in Philadelphia. The conversations are livelier, the expectations less constrained. He can be fully himself here in ways he cannot be with Deborah. Then comes the Stamp Act crisis. In 1765, Parliament passes legislation requiring colonists to purchase stamps for legal documents, newspapers, playing cards, dice, anything printed or used in commerce. It's a tax imposed without colonial consent, and the reaction in America is explosive. Riots in Boston, stamp distributors forced to resign, merchants organizing boycotts. The slogan, "No taxation without representation," crystallizes colonial grievances into a principle. Franklin initially misreads the situation. He thinks the Stamp Act, though unwise, is not worth massive resistance. He even recommends a friend for the position of stamp distributor in Philadelphia. A terrible misjudgment. When news reaches America, Franklin is burned in effigy in Philadelphia. His house on Market Street is threatened by mobs. Deborah, showing courage Franklin didn't know she possessed, arms herself and refuses to flee. The mob doesn't attack, but the message is clear. Franklin's accommodation with British authority has cost him American trust. But then Franklin redeems himself. In February 1766, he's called to testify before the House of Commons about colonial reaction to the Stamp Act. He prepares meticulously. For hours, he answers questions about American attitudes toward British authority, about the colony's ability to pay, about the difference between internal and external taxation, about the limits of parliamentary power. His performance is masterful, clear, reasonable, firm without being defiant. He explains that Americans love Britain, but will not accept taxation without representation, that the Stamp Act has transformed loyal subjects into potential rebels. Parliament repeals the Stamp Act in March 1766. Franklin's testimony is credited with influencing the decision. In America, he's suddenly a hero again. The man who stood before Parliament and defended colonial rights. The effigies stop burning. The threats cease. Letters arrive from colonial assemblies thanking him for his service. But Franklin knows something others don't quite see yet. The Stamp Act crisis has revealed a fundamental incompatibility. Parliament believes it has absolute authority over the colonies. Colonists believe they have rights the Parliament cannot violate. These positions cannot both be true, and no amount of goodwill or clever negotiation can reconcile them. Franklin still seeks accommodation. He still believes the empire can survive if both sides show reasonableness. He still collects his crown salary, still enjoys London society, still sees himself as British. But doubt is creeping in. He's beginning to question not just specific policies, but the entire structure of the imperial relationship, whether colonies can remain subordinate to a parliament 3,000 miles away, whether representation without actual representation is tenable, whether the empire's current form has a future. He doesn't voice these doubts publicly. He's still the loyal agent, the king's servant, the man working for reconciliation. But in private letters, in conversations with trusted friends, the questioning becomes sharper. And in his own mind, though he hasn't fully acknowledged it, a slow shift is occurring from British subject who happens to live in America to American who happens to be in London, from seeking to preserve the empire to wondering whether it deserves preservation. Deborah's letters arrive regularly. She's lonely. Her health continues to decline. She wants him to come home. Franklin writes back with promises. Soon as current business is settled, as soon as the colonial agencies no longer need him in London. The promises are sincere, but also hollow. Franklin is 62 years old. He's been in London on and off for most of the past decade. Philadelphia is where his wife lives. London is where he lives. The distinction grows sharper each year. The question forming in Franklin's mind is terrible and necessary. What happens when loyalty to empire conflicts with loyalty to country? When the two begin to diverge? When a man must choose between the world he enjoys and the world that formed him? The answer is still years away, but the question is there, growing, impossible to ignore forever. Between two worlds, Franklin stands on shifting ground, and the ground is beginning to give way beneath him. By 1770, Franklin has been in London, with only one brief return home, for most of 13 years. He's 64 years old, settled into comfortable routine. The Craven Street household is his home. London is his city. Then the Hutchinson letters arrive and everything unravels. In late 1772, Franklin obtains a packet of private letters written by Thomas Hutchinson, the royal governor of Massachusetts, and Andrew Oliver, the lieutenant governor. The letters, written to British officials between 1767 and 1769, advocate for harsh measures against colonial dissent. Hutchinson argues that American liberties must be curtailed, that there must be an abatement of what are called English liberties in the colonies. Franklin sends the letters to Boston in December 1772 with strict instructions. They may be shown to colonial leaders, but not copied or published. The intent is to prove that colonial problems stem from bad advisors, rather than the king or parliament themselves. But secrets, this explosive cannot be contained. In June 1773, the letters are published in Boston newspapers. The reaction is immediate and violent. Hutchinson is denounced as a traitor. The Massachusetts Assembly petitions for his removal. In London, the response is outrage. Who stole these private letters? Two innocent men fight a duel over accusations of theft. And Franklin, watching this, realizes he must come forward. In December 1773, he publishes a statement acknowledging that he sent the letters to Boston. The British establishment is livid. Franklin has violated the sanctity of private correspondence, has acted as a spy. He's summoned to appear before the Privy Council in January 1774 to answer charges related to the Massachusetts petition for Hutchinson's removal. The hearing takes place on January 29, 1774, in a room called the Cockpit. The room is packed with spectators, members of the Privy Council, politicians, prominent citizens. They've come to witness Franklin's humiliation. Alexander Wedderburn, the Solicitor General, rises to speak. What follows is not legal argument, but ritualized destruction. For an hour, Wedderburn verbally eviscerates Franklin. He calls him a thief who stole private letters, a liar who deceived his friends, a man without honor who violated every principle of gentleman's conduct. The accusations are delivered with elaborate sarcasm, with rhetorical flourishes designed to entertain the audience. And the audience responds. They laugh, they jeer, they applaud Wedderburn's wit at Franklin's expense. Franklin stands throughout, dressed formally in a suit of figured blue Manchester velvet. His face betrays nothing. He doesn't respond, doesn't defend himself, doesn't show anger or shame. He simply stands, silent, absorbing the humiliation with a stillness that is either dignified or broken. Later, witnesses will report that Franklin's expression never changed. But one observer, Edmund Burke, notices Franklin's hands, clenched so tightly that the knuckles are white, the only visible sign of the rage he's suppressing. Something happens to Franklin in that room, something fundamental and irreversible. The Privy Council rejects the Massachusetts petition, and Franklin, the next day, is stripped of his position as Deputy Postmaster General. The salary is gone. The official position within the British government is revoked. Franklin is cast out from the imperial system he's served for decades. The humiliation is designed to warn other colonists what happens when you challenge British authority. But for Franklin, it achieves something else. It makes reconciliation impossible. The empire he served has rejected him utterly. There's no path back now. The bridge has burned. Franklin remains in London through 1774, still technically serving as colonial agent. But the work is futile. Parliament passes the Coercive Acts, punishing Massachusetts for the Boston Tea Party by closing the port, altering the colonial charter, installing military rule. Franklin watches Britain respond to colonial resistance, not with concession, but with force. Then, on December 19th, 1774, Deborah Franklin dies in Philadelphia. The news reaches Franklin weeks later. Deborah suffered a stroke, sudden, debilitating. She lingered for days, surrounded by Sally and friends, asking for her husband. But Franklin was 3,000 miles away, in London, living a life that didn't include her. She died asking for him, and he wasn't there. The guilt is crushing. For 16 years of marriage, Franklin has been absent more than present. He's lived in London while Deborah managed his affairs in Philadelphia, defended his house against mobs, grew old waiting for him. Every letter from Deborah had contained the same plea: come home. Every response from Franklin had contained the same promise: soon. But soon never came. Years later, in his autobiography, Franklin will barely mention Deborah. A few sentences about their common law marriage, a brief note about her death. The woman who shared his life for 44 years merits less space than his experiments with electricity. The silence is its own confession. Deborah's death removes the last personal tie binding Franklin to accommodation with Britain. His wife is gone. His son William is Royal Governor of New Jersey, committed to the crown. The household Franklin built in Philadelphia is broken. What's left to preserve? In March 1775, Franklin boards a ship for Philadelphia. He's 69 years old, returning to America after more than a decade abroad, returning to a country on the verge of war. The mission has failed. The empire cannot be reformed. The voyage takes 6 weeks. Somewhere mid-Atlantic, on April 19, 1775, events he cannot yet know about are unfolding. British troops march from Boston to Concord. Militia gather at Lexington Green. Shots are fired. 8 militiamen dead. The war has begun. Franklin knows none of this as his ship crosses the Atlantic. But on May 5th, 1775, when he arrives in Philadelphia, the news is waiting. Lexington and Concord, armed conflict, the entire eastern seaboard mobilizing for war. Franklin steps onto the dock, home after a decade away, to find everything transformed. The careful accommodation he sought is impossible now. The moderate position he occupied no longer exists. There are only two sides now, and neutrality is betrayal to both. The city greets him with complicated feelings. He's still famous, still respected, but also suspect. He's lived in London for years. He collected crown salary. His son is a royal governor. Where does Franklin's loyalty actually lie? Franklin is assigned a room in the house on Market Street, the house where Deborah died waiting for him. Sally is there, married now to Richard Bache, with children Franklin is meeting for the first time. Deborah's absence haunts every room. The next day, May 6, 1775, Franklin is elected to the Second Continental Congress. There's no time for mourning, no leisure to adjust. America needs him. At 69, when most men are retired, Franklin is being called to the most demanding work of his life. The question everyone wants answered is the one Franklin cannot yet fully answer himself. Has he truly chosen America over Britain? Or is he still the imperial servant, the man who lived in London too long? Franklin will prove his loyalty through action, but the proof will require sacrifice of the most painful kind, the final break with his son William, the choice between family and country. The old man who arrives in Philadelphia in May 1775 is not the same man who left in 1757. The cockpit hearing broke something in him. Deborah's death broke something else. What's left is harder, more certain, less inclined to seek compromise. The British have taught Franklin a lesson he didn't want to learn, that some systems cannot be reformed, that peaceful change is sometimes impossible and violent revolution becomes necessary. It's a bitter lesson for a man who spent his life believing in reason, in improvement, in reconciliation. But Franklin has always been adaptable, always willing to update his understanding when evidence contradicts belief. The evidence is clear now. The empire is irreconcilable with liberty, and Franklin, finally, irrevocably, has chosen liberty. At 69, Benjamin Franklin begins again. The work ahead is immense. The odds are terrible. But Franklin has never been deterred by long odds. He walked into Philadelphia at 17 with nothing and built a life through stubborn persistence. Now, at 69, he'll help build a nation through the same stubborn persistence. The breaking point has passed. What comes next is war, and Franklin is ready for it. At 69, Benjamin Franklin is by far the oldest member of the Continental Congress. Most delegates are in their 30s and 40s. Vigorous men in the prime of life arguing about independence with the passion of youth. Franklin sits among them, mostly silent, his age and fame conferring authority that requires no assertion. When he does speak, the room quietens. Not because he's eloquent, his speeches are brief, practical, but because he's Benjamin Franklin, the man who tamed lightning, who negotiated with Parliament, who knows the British better than anyone else in America. Congress puts him to work immediately. He chairs the committee reorganizing the postal system, taking the infrastructure he built for the crown and transforming it into American infrastructure. He works on currency, designing continental dollars, understanding that a revolution needs money before it needs soldiers. He advises on military supplies, on fortifications, on the 1,000 practical details of transforming colonial resistance into organized war. But the most painful work is personal. His son William remains royal governor of New Jersey, loyal to the crown, convinced that his father has chosen treason over reason. The rupture between them grows through 1775 and into 1776. William argues that the colonies cannot win, that rebellion will end in hangings and ruin, that accommodation is still possible. Franklin responds that accommodation was tried and rejected, that the cockpit hearing proved British intentions, that dignity sometimes requires resistance, even when victory is uncertain. They meet for the last time in the summer of 1776 at the house of William's son Temple in Perth Amboy. The conversation is brief, formal, painful. Franklin asks William to resign his position, to join the American cause, or at least to remain neutral. William refuses. He's taken an oath to the king. His honor requires loyalty. The fact that this loyalty opposes his father is tragic, but doesn't alter the obligation. Franklin looks at his son, 45 years old, the boy he raised, the illegitimate child he acknowledged and educated and advanced, and sees a stranger. William looks at his father and sees an old man throwing away everything for a cause that cannot succeed. They part without reconciliation, both certain the other is wrong, neither willing to yield. William will be arrested in June 1776, imprisoned by revolutionaries for refusing to renounce his loyalty to the crown. He'll spend years in confinement, not in comfort, but in actual prison, suffering for his convictions. Franklin will make no effort to secure his release, will write no letters pleading for better treatment. The son who chose the king over his father will be left to face the consequences of that choice. They will never fully reconcile. After the war, they'll exchange stiff letters, will meet briefly, will maintain a cold civility. But the warmth is gone, the relationship broken. Franklin will make William's son, Temple, his companion and secretary, raising a grandson to replace the son he's lost. But Temple can never fully replace William, and the loss will shadow Franklin's remaining years. In June 1776, Franklin is appointed to the Committee of Five, tasked with drafting a Declaration of Independence. The actual writing falls to Thomas Jefferson, 33 years old, chosen for his eloquence with language. Franklin's role is mostly editorial, reading Jefferson's draft, suggesting changes, trimming the rhetoric, sharpening the arguments. Jefferson's original draft includes a long passage blaming King George for the slave trade. Franklin, who has owned slaves, who has grown increasingly uncomfortable with the institution, lets the passage stand, but the Continental Congress deletes it. South Carolina and Georgia won't accept it, and unity requires compromise, even on matters of principle. Franklin makes other small edits. Jefferson writes that certain truths are sacred and undeniable. Franklin changes it to self-evident. a subtle shift from religious to rational authority, from revelation to reason. The change is characteristic of Franklin's mind. Truths should be self-evident, requiring no appeal to divine sanction, standing on their own logical necessity. On July 4, 1776, Congress adopts the Declaration. The signing happens later, in August, and here legend places Franklin's most famous quote. John Hancock, signing first in his large, defiant hand, supposedly says they must all hang together. Franklin responds, "Yes, we must indeed all hang together, or most assuredly we shall all hang separately." The quote is probably apocryphal. No contemporary account records it. But it sounds like Franklin, that characteristic blend of wit and gallows humor, the ability to acknowledge terrible stakes while maintaining composure. Whether he said it or not, it captures the moment's reality. These men are committing treason. If they lose, they'll be hanged as traitors. There's no middle ground now, no possibility of retreat. The war goes badly. Washington's army is defeated in New York, retreats across New Jersey, loses battle after battle. By December 1776, American independence seems a brief, doomed experiment. The Continental Army is shrinking through desertion and expired enlistments. British forces control New York and are pushing south toward Philadelphia. Without foreign aid, money, weapons, soldiers, the revolution will collapse. Congress appoints Franklin as commissioner to France, tasked with the impossible: persuade the French monarchy to support a republican revolution against the British monarchy. The irony is obvious: seeking help from an absolute monarch to overthrow monarchical authority. But France and Britain are ancient enemies, and French support could transform the war. Franklin is 70 years old. The voyage will take weeks in winter Atlantic weather. The British Navy patrols the ocean, and if Franklin is captured, he'll be hanged as the most prominent traitor in the rebellion. He is old, often in pain from gout and kidney stones, aware that crossing the ocean at his age is dangerous even without the risk of capture. He accepts the mission anyway. What else would he do? Stay in Philadelphia while the city falls to the British? Retreat to some inland town and wait for the war's outcome? Franklin has never been a man who waits while others act. The revolution needs him in France, so he'll go to France even if the journey kills him. He sails in October 1776, accompanied by his grandsons Temple, 16, and Benjamin Franklin Bache, 7. The voyage is everything he feared: storms, seasickness, the constant possibility of interception by British warships. Franklin is miserable, ill, convinced at times that he's made a terrible mistake. But the ship evades British patrols, and on December 3, 1776, they reach France. Franklin arrives at the worst possible moment for American fortunes. News from America is catastrophic. Defeats, retreats, the Continental Army on the verge of dissolution. He's come to beg for aid when America appears to be losing, when supporting the revolution looks like backing a doomed cause. The odds of success are minimal. The probability of dying far from home is high. But Franklin is not deterred by long odds. He walked into Philadelphia at 17 with nothing and built a fortune. He flew a kite into a thunderstorm to test a theory that could have killed him. He stood silent before the Privy Council while being verbally destroyed and emerged with his convictions hardened rather than broken. Now, at 70, he'll attempt the most important negotiation of his life, persuading the French court to bet on American independence, to provide the money and military support that might transform desperate rebellion into actual revolution. The task is impossible, which means only that it will require everything Franklin has: his fame, his diplomatic skill, his scientific reputation, his ability to charm and persuade and persist. He steps onto French soil, an old man in a winter that seems determined to kill him, carrying the hopes of a revolution that appears to be failing. The question is whether those hopes are justified, or whether Franklin has crossed the ocean only to witness from abroad the final collapse of American independence. The answer will take years to resolve. But Franklin has never been afraid of work that takes years. He's patient, stubborn, willing to play long games. And France, he's about to discover, is ready to listen to him in ways Britain never was. The American in Paris is about to become the most famous man in France. And that fame will change everything. Franklin becomes an instant celebrity in France. Within days of his arrival in December 1776, all of Paris knows that the famous Dr. Franklin has come to their city. The man who tamed lightning, the natural philosopher whose experiments are known throughout Europe, the American sage. He's here, in Paris, and everyone wants to meet him. Franklin understands immediately that celebrity is a tool, and he uses it deliberately. He adopts a persona, the frontier philosopher. He wears a fur cap instead of the powdered wigs fashionable in Paris. He dresses plainly, brown coat, spectacles, no sword despite his diplomatic status. The effect is calculated. He appears as the noble savage, the American innocent, Rousseau's natural man brought to life in the most sophisticated city in Europe. The French adore it. His image appears everywhere: portraits, engravings, snuff boxes, chamber pots. Women wear their hair a la Franklin. Poems are written praising him. Salon hostesses compete for his presence at their gatherings. He's introduced to King Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette, to ministers and philosophers and scientists. Voltaire, ancient and dying, meets Franklin at the Academy of Sciences. They embrace. The crowd demands they kiss in the French manner, and the two old men comply to thunderous applause. But underneath the celebrity is desperate work. Franklin has no money. Congress can send no funds. The continental currency is nearly worthless, and American credit is non-existent. He must beg the French government for loans, for military supplies, for ships and soldiers. Every request is met with polite delay, with expressions of sympathy, but no commitment. France is interested in weakening Britain, but not yet ready to openly support American independence. The negotiations are conducted in secret, through intermediaries, with British spies reporting every development to London. Franklin knows his correspondence is intercepted, his movements watched. He responds with characteristic pragmatism. He writes his letters knowing the British will read them, sometimes including information designed to mislead or worry his enemies. News from America is terrible throughout 1777. Washington's army defeated at Brandywine, Philadelphia captured by the British, the Continental Congress fleeing to York. Then comes the winter at Valley Forge, soldiers starving, freezing, deserting. Franklin reads these reports in his comfortable rooms in Passy, the village outside Paris, where he's established residence, and feels the weight of distance. He's 71 years old, living in luxury while American soldiers die in snow. But he persists. Every day, the same patient work, letters to French ministers, meetings with potential supporters, careful cultivation of French public opinion. He reminds the French that supporting America weakens Britain, that American independence serves French interests, that the cause is just and the eventual victory certain despite current defeats. Then, in December 1777, news arrives that changes everything. Saratoga. General Burgoyne's entire British army has surrendered to American forces in upstate New York. It's the first major American victory, proof that the Continental Army can defeat British regulars, evidence that American independence might actually be achievable. Franklin uses the news brilliantly. He lets it be known that he's considering opening negotiations with Britain for reconciliation, a complete fabrication, but one designed to alarm the French. The strategy works. France decides that if it doesn't commit to America now, it might lose the opportunity to weaken Britain. In February 1778, Franklin signs two treaties, a commercial treaty and, more importantly, a treaty of alliance. France recognizes American independence and commits to military support. It's Franklin's greatest diplomatic triumph. At 72, working alone except for his fellow commissioners John Adams and Arthur Lee, both of whom mostly quarrel with Franklin and each other, he secured the support that transforms American independence from desperate hope to genuine possibility. When France enters the war in June 1778, the entire strategic calculation changes. Britain now faces not just colonial insurgents, but a major European power. Franklin settles into life in Passy, in a mansion provided by a French supporter. The house is comfortable, the grounds extensive. His grandsons live with him, Temple serving as his secretary, young Benjamin Franklin Bache attending school in Geneva. The work continues. More loans. France will eventually provide millions of livres. More supplies, coordination between French and American forces. But there's also time for other things. He forms an intimate friendship with Madame Briand, a beautiful woman in her 30s, married but unhappily. She plays harpsichord exquisitely. Franklin visits her home frequently, sits with her while she plays, writes her tender letters, calling her "my dear daughter," while the tone suggests something more than paternal affection. They play chess together. She sometimes sits on his lap. The French are comfortable with physical affection that would scandalize Americans. The relationship is romantic without being sexual, or perhaps sexual in ways that don't require consummation. It's tender, playful, deeply important to both of them. There's also Madame Helvétius, a widow in her 60s, brilliant, unconventional, presiding over a salon of intellectuals and keeping multiple cats. Franklin proposes marriage to her, seriously or in jest. It's hard to say. She declines, but remains his close friend. his intellectual companion. The two widowed old people understand each other in ways younger people cannot. These relationships scandalize John Adams, who finds Franklin's behavior frivolous and morally suspect. Adams thinks Franklin should be working harder, attending fewer dinners, spending less time with French women. But Franklin understands what Adams doesn't. In France, social connections are political capital. The dinners and salons and friendships are the work. This is how diplomacy happens in Paris, not through formal negotiations, but through networks of influence built over wine and conversation. Franklin continues his scientific work. He invents bifocal glasses, lenses that allow him to see both near and far without changing spectacles. He studies the Gulf Stream, taking temperature measurements during his Atlantic crossings, mapping the current that affects shipping times. He conducts experiments on the physics of swimming, on the absorption of heat by different colors, on whatever catches his curiosity. At 75, he's still asking questions, still investigating. The war grinds on. More battles, more loans, more diplomatic complications. Franklin navigates French court politics, manages the impossible John Adams, deflects British peace overtures designed to split America from France. In 1781, he's joined by John Jay as fellow peace commissioner, adding another voice to the American diplomatic presence. Then, in November 1781, news arrives from America. Yorktown. Cornwallis's entire army has surrendered to Washington and the French fleet. The British Southern strategy has collapsed. The war isn't over. Fighting will continue. But the outcome is no longer in doubt. American independence will happen. Franklin, 75 years old, reads the reports and allows himself to believe, finally, that the impossible thing has occurred. The revolution has succeeded. The colonies are becoming a nation. Everything he's worked for, the years in France, the diplomatic maneuvering, the patient persistence, has achieved its purpose. But the work isn't finished. Yorktown means military victory, but peace must still be negotiated. The British must formally recognize American independence. The terms must be settled. Borders, fishing rights, debts, 1,000 details. Franklin cannot go home yet. The old man, who thought he might die in France, begins to suspect he actually will die here, that he'll never see Philadelphia again. For now, though, there's satisfaction. The American in Paris has done what he came to do. The fur cap and plain dress, the calculated performance of American innocence, the friendships with French women and philosophers, the endless dinners and negotiations, all of it has worked. France has supported America, and America has won. The question now is what comes after victory, whether 13 separate colonies can actually form a coherent nation, whether the ideals of the Declaration can survive the practical challenges of governance. But those are questions for the future. Tonight, in Passy, Franklin can rest. Victory, at last. The peace negotiations begin in Paris in April 1782, though informal discussions have been happening for months. Franklin represents America alongside John Adams and John Jay. The three men are supposed to work together, but they barely tolerate each other. Adams is suspicious of Franklin's French sympathies, irritated by his popularity in Paris, convinced that Franklin's socializing is laziness. disguised as diplomacy. Adams writes letters complaining about Franklin. He sleeps too late, attends too many dinners, relies too much on French goodwill. Franklin, for his part, finds Adams rigid, humorless, unable to understand that diplomacy requires building trust through personal relationships. John Jay is somewhere between them, less suspicious than Adams, less comfortable with French intimacy than Franklin. The three men argue constantly about strategy, about what terms to accept, about whether to trust the French. The French are officially America's ally, but their interests don't perfectly align with American interests. France wants to weaken Britain, yes, but not to create a strong, independent America that might become a rival. The French would prefer a small American nation, confined to the Atlantic coast, dependent on French support. They certainly don't want America to expand westward to the Mississippi River. Franklin understands this. Despite Adams' suspicions, Franklin has no illusions about French altruism, so he engages in brilliant diplomatic maneuvering. He negotiates separately with Britain while keeping France informed enough to maintain the alliance, but not so informed that they can interfere. He plays British and French against each other, using each side's fears about the other to secure better terms for America. The British negotiator, Richard Oswald, is sympathetic to America and easy to work with, but the real negotiations happen at higher levels, and the terms Franklin seeks are ambitious. Recognition of American independence, borders extending to the Mississippi River, access to fishing grounds off Newfoundland, evacuation of British troops from American territory. The British are willing to be generous. They've lost the war. They want to separate America from France to create goodwill that might lead to future commercial relationships. And they're dealing with Franklin, who many British leaders still respect despite everything that's happened. In November 1782, preliminary articles are signed. In September 1783, the final Treaty of Paris is concluded. American independence is formally recognized. The borders are generous, from the Atlantic to the Mississippi, from the Great Lakes to Florida. Americans gain fishing rights. British troops will evacuate. It's a diplomatic triumph, far better terms than America's military position alone would justify. Franklin has achieved what he came to France to do. He's 77 years old. He's been in France for 7 years. He wants to go home. In 1783, he writes to Congress requesting permission to return to America, to retire, to die in his own country. Congress responds with gratitude and a polite refusal. They need him in France to handle ongoing diplomatic matters, to maintain the crucial relationship with the French court. Franklin is too valuable to be recalled, so he stays. 2 more years in Passy, growing old, his body failing. The gout that has troubled him for years worsens. Kidney stones cause constant pain. Moving becomes difficult, then agonizing. He can barely walk, must be carried in a sedan chair when he needs to travel. The bifocal glasses he invented are necessary now. His eyes are failing along with everything else. But his mind remains sharp. He continues his correspondence, his scientific observations, his diplomatic work. He writes essays, conducts experiments, receives visitors from across Europe who want to meet the famous Dr. Franklin before he dies. Thomas Jefferson arrives in 1784 to replace Franklin as minister to France. Franklin shows him the diplomatic ropes, introduces him to crucial contacts, passes along the accumulated wisdom of 7 years navigating French politics. Finally, in 1785, Congress grants permission for Franklin to return home. He's 79 years old. The journey will be difficult, possibly fatal, but he's determined to die in America if possible, to see Philadelphia one more time. King Louis XVI presents Franklin with a parting gift, a miniature portrait of the king surrounded by 408 diamonds, set in the lid of a snuff box. It's a magnificent gift, worth a small fortune, a mark of genuine affection and respect. Franklin accepts it with gratitude and appropriate ceremony. Later, he'll have the portrait removed and give it to his daughter Sally, keeping only the diamond-encrusted box as a reminder of his years in France. The departure from Passy in July 1785 is emotional. Madame Brillon and Madame Helvetius come to say goodbye. They know they'll never see him again. Franklin is too old, too sick to return to France, and they're not young themselves. The farewells are tender, prolonged. Franklin promises to write, and he will. But letters across the Atlantic are poor substitutes for presents. He cannot walk to the carriage. Servants carry him in a litter, a portable bed slung between poles. Queen Marie Antoinette has lent the royal litter, a gesture of extraordinary honor. Franklin is transported like an invalid prince through the streets of Paris, crowds gathering to watch the American philosopher's departure. At the coast, he's carried aboard ship the same way, unable to manage the gangplank under his own power. The voyage takes 7 weeks. Franklin is seasick, in pain, convinced at times that he won't survive the journey. But the ship arrives safely at Philadelphia on September 14th, 1785. The city greets him as a conquering hero. Cannons, fire salutes, church bells ring. Crowds line the streets. Franklin, carried ashore in a litter, is overwhelmed by the reception. He's been gone for 9 years, longer than he intended, longer than he wanted. He left Philadelphia when the revolution was barely a year old, when American independence was desperate hope. He returns to an established nation, to a country that exists because of work he did in Paris. But much has changed. The city is larger, more prosperous, different. People he knew have died. Sally is middle-aged now, with children who barely know their grandfather. The house on Market Street is familiar, but also strange, like a place from memory that doesn't quite match reality. And Franklin is tired, not just physically exhausted, though he is that. The pain is constant, the simple act of moving difficult, but tired in a deeper way. He's 79 years old. He's worked without pause since age 10, 69 years of labor. He's built a printing empire, conducted revolutionary scientific experiments, helped draft the Declaration of Independence, secured French support that won the war, negotiated the peace treaty that established American independence. What's left to do? What could possibly justify more effort? He wants to rest. He wants to spend his remaining time with Sally and her children, to organize his papers, to finish his autobiography, to die peacefully in his own bed rather than in some foreign city. He's earned retirement, earned peace, earned the right to stop. But America it turns out, is not finished with Benjamin Franklin. The hero's welcome is genuine, but it's also expectation. The city wants him. The state wants him. The struggling new nation wants him. At 79, Franklin will be given no rest. The final chapter of his life will require everything he has left to give. For now, though, there's the satisfaction of arrival. Home, finally. Philadelphia. The city he walked into at 17 with nothing. The city where he built his life. The city that gave him the platform to become Benjamin Franklin. He's back. He's accomplished what he set out to accomplish. The boy with bread under his arms has become the old man who helped create a nation. The journey is nearly over, but not quite yet. Franklin is elected President of Pennsylvania in October 1785, barely a month after his return from France. The position is largely ceremonial. The state's executive council holds the real power, but it requires presence at meetings, signing documents, lending authority to government actions. Franklin accepts because refusing seems ungrateful, because the state needs a figure of unity, because at 79 he hasn't quite learned how to say no. He's re-elected in 1786, then again in 1787. 3 one-year terms, the maximum allowed. The work exhausts him. The gout makes every movement painful. The kidney stones produce episodes of agony that leave him bedridden for days. He attends council meetings when he can, conducts business from home when he can not. Pennsylvania is governed more or less, but Franklin's contribution is increasingly his name, rather than his active participation. Then, in May 1787, delegates begin arriving in Philadelphia for the Constitutional Convention, the Articles of Confederation, America's first attempt at national government, have proven inadequate. The states squabble. Congress has no power to tax or regulate commerce. The nation is fragmented and weak. Something must be done. And 55 delegates from 12 states, Rhode Island refuses to participate, gather to do it. Franklin is elected a delegate from Pennsylvania. At 81, he's by far the oldest person in the room. Most delegates are in their 30s and 40s. James Madison is 36, Alexander Hamilton 30. George Washington, at 55, is among the older delegates, but even he is a generation younger than Franklin. The convention meets in the Pennsylvania State House, the same building where the Declaration of Independence was signed 11 years earlier. The windows are kept closed despite the summer heat. The debates must be secret. Franklin's house is only a few blocks away, but the walk is beyond his capability. On days when he attends, he's carried in a sedan chair, a covered seat supported by poles, borne by 4 prisoners from the Walnut Street jail, whom Franklin has hired for the purpose. The image is striking. The ancient philosopher carried like a Chinese emperor through Philadelphia streets, his body failing, but his mind still engaged, still necessary to the nation's birth. The debates are intense, often angry. Large states want representation based on population. Small states demand equal representation. Southern states want slaves counted for representation, but not for taxation. Northern states object. The question of executive power divides everyone. How strong should the president be? How long should he serve? Should there even be a single executive, or would a council be safer? Franklin's role is conciliator. He's too old for passionate advocacy, too experienced to believe any single vision is perfect. He proposes compromises. When debate becomes heated, he tells stories, long, rambling anecdotes that ease tension and allow time for tempers to cool. The younger delegates sometimes find this irritating, but it works. Franklin has no illusions about creating a perfect government. He wants something workable, something the states will ratify, something better than what currently exists. He proposes that the executive serve without salary, a suggestion immediately rejected. He supports the Great Compromise, which creates a bicameral legislature with the House based on population and the Senate giving equal representation to states. It's not what anyone wanted, which makes it acceptable to everyone. On the question of slavery, Franklin is silent during most debates. He owns no slaves now. He's freed the few he had, and he's privately become convinced that slavery is morally wrong. But he knows the southern states will not accept a constitution that threatens the institution. So he says nothing, allows the compromises that protect slavery while avoiding the word itself in the Constitution's text. It's pragmatism of the most painful kind, accepting evil to achieve a larger good, or telling himself that's what he's doing. The convention concludes in September 1787. The final document is imperfect. Everyone agrees on that. The question is whether imperfect is good enough, whether the delegates should sign it despite reservations. Franklin prepares a speech for the convention's final day. He's too weak to deliver it himself. The speaking voice that could hold a room is gone, replaced by a whisper that carries no distance. James Wilson reads Franklin's words aloud while Franklin sits, listening to his own thoughts in another man's voice. The speech is remarkable for what it confesses. I confess that there are several parts of this Constitution which I do not at present approve, but I am not sure I shall never approve them. He acknowledges uncertainty, admits that his own judgment might be wrong, suggests that the older he grows, the more he doubts his own opinions. But despite reservations, he urges unanimous support. The Constitution is imperfect, but it's also the best they can achieve. And perfection is not available to human beings. It's the wisdom of age speaking, the recognition that certainty is mostly a function of inexperience, that doubt is appropriate, that disagreement doesn't require opposition. Younger men might hold out for ideal solutions. Franklin, at 81, knows that ideal solutions don't exist and that working solutions are precious. 39 delegates sign the Constitution. 3 refuse. Franklin signs, his hand shaking, supported by others. As the last delegates are signing, he makes an observation about the sun painted on the back of George Washington's chair. He's wondered throughout the convention whether it's a rising or setting sun. Now, with the Constitution complete, he's decided it's a rising sun. America's future is beginning, not ending. The Constitution must still be ratified by the states. Entente process that will take a year and generate fierce debate. But Franklin has done his part. At 81, having helped write both the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, he's contributed to America's birth twice. Once in declaring its independence, once in establishing its government. His final public act comes in February 1790. The Pennsylvania Abolition Society, which Franklin serves as president, submits a petition to Congress calling for the abolition of slavery. It's Franklin's name on the petition that gives it weight, that forces Congress to actually debate it. Southern congressmen are furious. The petition goes nowhere. Congress has no power to abolish slavery in the states, and even if it did, the votes aren't there. But Franklin has made his position clear. The man who once owned slaves, who stayed silent during the Constitutional Convention's debates on slavery, uses his final political capital to oppose the institution. He's dying now, and he knows it. The pain is constant. He can barely leave his bed. Old friends have died. David Hartley in England. Madame Brillon writes less frequently. Madame Helvetius's letters arrive from across an ocean that might as well be infinity. He writes long letters to European correspondents, knowing these might be his last communications. He works on his autobiography, adding sections, trying to finish the story. But the autobiography will remain incomplete. It ends in 1757, with Franklin's departure for England, before most of what made him famous occurred. Perhaps he's too tired to write about the Revolution, the French years, the diplomacy, or perhaps some experiences resist narrative, remain too complex to reduce to autobiography's simple arc. The shadows are gathering. Franklin, 84 years old, lies in bed in the house on Market Street, surrounded by Sally and her children, by grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The pain comes in waves. The laudanum helps, but makes everything distant, dreamlike. He's lived an impossible life. From candlemaker's son to the man who tamed lightning, from runaway apprentice to friend of kings, from colonial printer to founder of a nation. The distance between where he started and where he's arrived is so vast as to seem fictional. But he lived it, step by step, choice by choice, refusal by refusal to accept limitation. Now the life is ending. The question is, what comes next? Not for Franklin personally, but for the nation he helped create, for the experiment in self-government he supported, for the idea that common people can govern themselves without kings or aristocracy. That question will outlive him, will remain open long after his death. But Franklin has done his part. The rest belongs to others. The gathering shadows deepen. Soon, very soon, they will become complete darkness. But not quite yet. Spring arrives in Philadelphia in 1790, but Benjamin Franklin will not see summer. The illness begins in late March. Pleurisy, inflammation of the lungs, then abscesses forming in the chest cavity. The pain is severe, breathing difficult. Doctors are called do what doctors can do in 1790, which is very little. Laudanum for the pain. Bleeding, which weakens him further. Rest, which is all that's left. Franklin is confined to bed in the house on Market Street. Sally is there constantly, her father's primary caregiver in these final weeks. She's 46 now, has spent her life in her father's shadow, watched him leave repeatedly for London and France, welcomed him home when he returned. Now she performs the final daughterly duty, easing him toward death. grandson's visit. Temple, now 30, who served as Franklin's secretary in France, who knows his grandfather better than most. Benjamin Franklin Bache, 20, recently returned from Europe, starting a printing career in Philadelphia. They sit by the bedside, hold the old man's hand, listen to stories when he has strength to tell them. The morphine creates strange effects. Franklin drifts between clarity and delirium. In lucid moments, he's himself, sharp, observant, occasionally witty even now. He asks about political news, about family matters, about whether his papers are properly organized. In other moments, he's elsewhere, perhaps in London, perhaps in Paris, perhaps in the print shop on Market Street 60 years ago, perhaps places no one else can see. On April 17, 1790, at approximately 11 o'clock at night, Benjamin Franklin dies. He's 84 years old. The cause is officially recorded as pleurisy, but it's also simply old age, the body worn out by 8 decades of use, finally surrendering. Sally is with him at the end. His grandsons are there. The exact final moment is quiet, unremarkable, breathing that becomes shallower, then stops. The man who reached into the heavens and brought down fire, who helped birth a nation, who lived an impossible life, simply ceases. The funeral is held 4 days later, on April 21st. 20,000 people attend, roughly half of Philadelphia's population. The procession stretches for blocks. All the city's clergy participate, regardless of denomination. Presbyterians, Episcopalians, Catholics, Jews, because Franklin belonged to no particular church, but was respected by all. The bells of Christ Church toll. Newspapers appear with black borders. Ships in the harbor lower their flags to half-mast. Franklin is buried in the Christ Church burial ground next to Deborah, who died 16 years earlier while he was in London. The headstone is simple, exactly as Franklin specified in his will. Benjamin and Deborah Franklin, 1790. No titles, no accomplishments listed, just the names and the year. Though of course everyone knows whose grave this is, will know for centuries. News of Franklin's death reaches Paris in June. Response is extraordinary. Mirabeau rises before the National Assembly. France is in the midst of its own revolution now, and delivers a eulogy praising Franklin as the philosopher who freed America and enlightened France. The Assembly votes 3 days of mourning. People throughout Paris wear mourning bands. The man who arrived in France as a desperate supplicant is mourned as a hero who shaped history. Franklin's will is a testament to his character, complex, thoughtful, trying to shape the future even from the grave. He leaves money to Boston and Philadelphia with instructions that it be loaned to young tradesmen for 100 years, then used for public improvements. He divides his property carefully among family members. To Sally goes the house on Market Street and most of his estate. To Temple, a tract of land in Nova Scotia and some money, though less than Temple expected. Perhaps Franklin's way of expressing disappointment that Temple never amounted to what his grandfather hoped. To William, the estranged son who chose loyalty to Britain over his father, Franklin leaves some property, but with a bitter note. The lands are offered if he is still alive, a phrase that suggests how little contact remained between them. Franklin also forgives debts William owes him, but the forgiveness is noted rather than generously given, recorded as a transaction rather than reconciliation. The bequests reveal Franklin to the end. Practical, forward-thinking, using money as a tool for improvement, but also holding grudges, rewarding loyalty, punishing what he saw as betrayal. The legacy Franklin leaves is vast and complicated. In education, he founded the institution that became the University of Pennsylvania, created the first subscription library in America, demonstrated that knowledge could be democratized. In science, his work on electricity remains foundational. The concepts of positive and negative charge, the conductor and the insulator, the lightning rod that has saved countless buildings from fire. His studies of the Gulf Stream improved navigation. His meteorological observations contributed to weather science. His bifocals are still worn. His practical inventions, the Franklin stove, the flexible catheter, the glass harmonica, solved real problems. In civic infrastructure, he established patterns that persist. Volunteer fire companies, lending libraries, learned societies, hospitals, postal systems organized for public benefit rather than private profit. He proved that citizens could create institutions for mutual benefit without waiting for government or aristocracy to provide them. In political thought, his influence is subtler but profound. The Albany Plan of Union prefigured the Constitution. His pragmatic republicanism, the belief that government should serve practical purposes rather than embody abstract principles, shaped American political culture. His conviction that merit should trump birth, that a person's worth depends on what they contribute rather than who their parents were, became distinctively American. The image that persists is powerful. Franklin's face on the $100 bill, embodying American self-invention, the idea that anyone can rise through talent and effort. The printer who became a philosopher, the runaway apprentice who became a founder, the candle maker's son who dined with kings. But the contradictions persist too. Franklin owned slaves for much of his life, only becoming an abolitionist in old age. Was this moral growth, or merely the luxury of someone who no longer benefited from the institution? He abandoned Deborah for years at a time, maintained the appearance of marriage while living an essentially separate life. Was this necessary sacrifice for public duty, or simple selfishness? He became estranged from his son William over political loyalty. Was this principled commitment to revolution, or the inability to accept that his son might choose differently? He preached virtue, frugality, industry, temperance. In Poor Richard's Almanac, while living in Paris, enjoying fine wine, rich food, and the company of beautiful women, he cultivated the image of the simple frontiersman while being deeply sophisticated, politically cunning, calculating in his self-presentation. Can one person contain such multitudes? Can contradictions make a whole? Franklin's life suggests, yes, that human beings are never simple, that the same person can be selfish and public-spirited, calculating and generous, faithful and faithless. Perhaps the self-invention Franklin embodied requires this, the willingness to be multiple things, to contain oppositions, to refuse reduction to a single story. The moment with the kite and the key, That scene in the thunderstorm in 1752 captures this duality perfectly. It happened. Franklin really did draw electrical fire from the clouds, really did prove that lightning is electrical. The historical record is clear, but the moment has also been embellished, simplified, mythologized. In popular imagination, Franklin flies the kite in a dramatic storm, is nearly struck by lightning, stands heroic against the elements. The reality was more careful, less theatrical, conducted with scientific precision rather than dramatic flair. But which version matters more? The historical event or the myth? Franklin himself was always both. The actual man who lived and breathed and made choices, and the symbol of American possibility, the story told about what a person can become. The two Franklins are inseparable now, woven together across 2.5 centuries, impossible to fully disentangle. That spark leaping from the key to Franklin's knuckle in 1752 is still visible, still crackling across the distance between earth and sky. Franklin reached into the heavens and brought something down. Not just electrical fire, but the possibility of understanding, the idea that mysteries can be solved, that the powerful forces governing the world can be comprehended and harnessed and put to use. He reached and he grasped and he held on. The boy with bread under his arms became the old man who helped create a nation. The distance between those two moments, between arrival and achievement, between nothing and everything, is the distance Franklin traveled, and the distance he proved could be traveled. The storm breaks, the rain falls, the lightning flashes, and somewhere in Philadelphia, in a burial ground next to Christ Church, beneath a simple headstone, Benjamin Franklin rests. The kite has come down from the sky. The key has stopped sparking. The man is gone. But the questions remain about merit and birth, about liberty and constraint, about what humans can achieve when they refuse to accept limitation. Franklin asked those questions in everything he did, and in asking them, he helped create a country dedicated to the proposition that the questions matter more than inherited answers, that each generation must find its own way. The storm breaks, but the questions persist, and in their persistence, Franklin lives still.